Buttons. This morning I want to talk about buttons. Yes, I want to say a word about those tiny things that are so important and so helpful. You all wear buttons. You all need buttons. You have buttons on your shirts, buttons on your blouses, and buttons on your coats. There are white buttons, black buttons, red buttons, blue buttons. There are all kinds of buttons that you wear every day. And believe me, those buttons are very important. Did you ever notice how closely a button clings to a shirt or coat the first time you wear the garment? Yes, that's true. But then what happens? If you wear the coat or shirt often, the button slowly becomes loose and, day by day, the button gets farther away from the cloth. Now if you don't tighten the button with new thread, what happens? You know what happens. You lose your button. So whenever a button gets loose, be sure and have your mother tighten the button with new thread. Buttons must be kept close to your shirt or coat. Keep the thread tight, and then you will never have any trouble with your buttons. When you were baptized, children, your soul was very close to God. But what has happened? I dare say that your soul doesn't cling so closely to God this morning. And why? Because down through the years, time and time again, you have fallen into venial sin. And every venial sin has pulled you a little away from God. This morning I'd like to warn you. If you keep on committing venial sins, if you keep on pulling your soul away from God, someday you may fall into a mortal sin. Then your soul would be cut off entirely from God, and you certainly don't want that to happen. Children, every sin is an offense against God. Every sin hurts God. Even a venial sin hurts God. Sometimes boys and girls think that God doesn't mind venial sins. A venial sin is only a small sin, they say, and God doesn't care. Well, God does care. God doesn't like any sin, even the smallest one, because He knows that every little sin draws you away from Him. God hates sin, and He wants you to hate sin. The devil, you know, is always on the job. He is always working against God. He is always working for your soul. Now, the devil doesn't try to pull you away from God suddenly. He takes his time and works slowly. The devil starts off with little things. First, he tries to get you to like sin by tempting you to do something small against God. When you obey him and commit your first venial sin, the devil smiles and waits for another chance. Then the devil tempts you again to commit another venial sin, and then another and another. He gets you used to committing venial sins. Then, when he is sure that you like sin and that you are not afraid of God, the devil tempts you into mortal sin. Can't you see, then, how each venial sin draws you farther away from God? Each venial sin hurts you. Don't forget it. So don't get the idea that venial sins are not important. They are very important. Venial sins do much harm, much damage, even though you call them small sins. When you have a loose button on your coat or shirt, what do you usually do? Well, I know what you should do. Just as soon as you see that a button is loose, you should ask your mother to tighten the button. The button belongs close to your shirt or coat. Now, if your soul has slipped away from God because of your venial sin, then you should do everything that will help you keep away from those small sins, because your soul belongs close to God. You should pray and you should pray, especially when the devil tempts you. You should go to confession often and receive our Lord often in Holy Communion. You should keep away from the persons, places, and things that lead you into sin. When you are sick, you go to the doctor. Even though you are not very sick, you take the doctor's medicine because you want to be well again. If you will do the simple things that I've told you to do, you will cure yourself of all venial sins. Why don't you take one venial sin at a time? Avoid that one sin every day and make sure that you don't commit it. Then, when you are very sure that you are not committing that sin anymore, take another venial sin and work on that one. If you do that, you'll find that in a very short time, you'll not be committing any venial sins at all. In other words, you'll be living the life of a saint, and your soul will be just where it belongs, very close to God. Children, take a good look at your buttons, the buttons on your shirts, and the buttons on your coats. Are you sure you're not losing any buttons? Be sure that your buttons cling close to your shirts and coats at all times. And every time you look at a tiny button, think of your soul. Make sure at all times that your soul is not slipping away from God by your venial sins. Keep away from every small sin, and your soul will cling to God. That's where your soul belongs. God bless you, and take good care of yourself.